This is the Sunday stream opening song because the other song is copyrighted. La 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 la. Oh, look, here comes Dog Cat Fox.
Hi, Sky.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sunday stream. The stream I do on Sundays because Sunday is the day to stream on Sundays. Hope you're all doing well this morning. First and foremost, thank you so much to Bubba Hotep. That is extremely generous of you with the jumping celebratory fireworks Dogcat Fox. Oh, Dogcat Fox.
Wow. Wow.
Thank you so much. That's very nice of you. No comment, but I appreciate it. I don't know if you can do comments and stickers at the same time. You can, can't you? I don't know. Either way, nice way to start the morning. But I was totally thrown off track by Bubba Hotep's generosity. So I'll just say good morning to those of you that have joined me this morning. Of course, Bubba Hotep, Fun Time Bats, Kiever Dam, Swirl Blue, Jaeger Pony, and then Chat Jump, because of course it does. Jamie Melquist, Mike R, Arc 210, TC, Mike Savage, Portmanteau, Matt Barnes, Absolutely Degenerate, Robert Pincus, Green Death. Good morning to you all. Hope you're all doing well. Just as a side note, I had one of the most entertaining comments come my way on one of my TEDx videos. As far as I can tell, and I could be wrong, but as far as I could tell, the person commenting only knew me to that point via my true crime video or videos, now that I have two up. And they decided to click on one of the TEDx's and was so taken aback by my energy as compared to the tone and, tempo I had on the true crime videos. They were quite surprised that I had, I guess, that much energy. I had to tone it down a bit. But yeah, so there you go. Otherwise, what do we have on deck today for the Sunday stream? Well, have you ever heard of the, let me see if I want to get this right. I don't want to misquote this particular organization because I'm a little, I came across this and I wasn't quite sure what to make of it. So let me make sure I got this right. Sorry for the delay, but accuracy in journalism. The National Network of State Teachers of the Year. The National Network of State Teachers of the Year. Can you think of a more niche club to be in? I'm sure you could, but at the moment I'm challenged to do so. Either way, they have their own YouTube channel and they have something they want to tell us, apparently, or at least one member of their number wants to tell us. And that is equity, justice, and activism. Why this matters for white students. I'm always curious to find out what skin color says or is supposed to imply about someone's, capacity or value or morality. I don't know. I suppose we'll find out. So with that, not much preamble otherwise, I'll start off with a few seconds for sound test. You guys tell me if you can hear this. Editorial note, I did chop out a little bit at the beginning where the introducer person, the host, I suppose, goes over some, technical matters. And then I also took off the question and answer portion at the end. So this clocks in at just under 40 minutes. I don't know if we'll get to the whole 40. We probably won't need it. In real time, I'll go about an hour and a half. That is, granted my power lasts, because the lights have been flickering here and there for the last, half hour or so. Fingers crossed, if the stream suddenly stops, that's probably why. But with all that being said as preamble, again, let me know if you guys can hear this, and we will proceed to finding out about equity, justice, and activism, and why this, or these maybe, matter for white students.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'd like to take a moment and ask you all to put yourselves on mute.
Well, I'm afraid I can't do that because the whole point of this is that I'm talking during this. That's how commentary streams go. You guys hear that all right? Keeverdam says sounds good. Swirl Blue says sounds good. Well, if those two say sounds good, then it must be good. Let's go.
And it is my pleasure to introduce Leanne Erickson.
Mm-hmm.
Erickson is an educator, activist, and author of What is White Privilege?
Educator, activist, and author. All right. So coming into this already knowing that she has an agenda. What is white privilege? I can't wait to hear it.
Has taught in New York City, Chicago, rural Ohio, and Mount Vernon, Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
She is a finalist for the 2019 Iowa Teacher of the Year and aims to eradicate racism through justice-driven teaching.
Aims to eradicate racism through justice-driven teaching. And she's about to tell us about an entire racial demographic in the abstract. Sounds promising.
With a focus on educating white students and adults.
Because white students and adults are obviously inherently deficient of certain levels of education.
Erickson is the founder of Undone Consulting and the Undone Movement, a nationwide movement of racial reconciling.
Movement, but it's a consulting firm? Is there a conflict there somewhere?
Grateful to play a small role in century-long resistant work, she owes much to her family, friends, and mentors. So I will let her take it away from here.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here. And
oh, well, hello. So how much of a flaw do you then personally possess, given your hue, as it were?
If you're wondering what took me from New York City to Iowa, it was love. I fell in love with an Iowan in New York, and he took me to the motherland, as he likes to call it. So here I am in Iowa, teaching and consulting and raising 4 little boys. And I am so grateful to be here to have this conversation.
It's not a conversation unless you're actually talking to someone else. You're actually giving us one long monologue. Unless there's a panel I just don't see. Oh, I suppose with the question and answer session at the end, which we're not going to cover, there could be a conversation there, but it's mostly just monologue.
Dr. Barber said this morning that we must teach the nation in order to change the nation. I think that is so particularly and uniquely important for white students.
Why? What is special about white students? I hope she expands on that.
And I'm really excited to talk about why I think that is.
I'm sure you are. It's your business to do so.
And why we have such a responsibility to address these students specifically when it comes to equity and race, and how to do that as well.
Okay.
So thank you so much.
I'm looking forward
for having me here.
Yes. Real quick, thank you, Pincalo, the driving ape man. Let me get this here. If it'll pop up on the other screen. There we go. Isn't having 4 boys patriarchal? Well, I guess she just has a very sexist womb, you know. Or nature said, I will give unto thee those who are inherently flawed, that you might fix them with your vast knowledge of how to tell the quality of someone by looking at them. I don't know. I'm reaching there just a little bit. Thank you, Pincalo.
So today in our 45 minutes, we have some big goals, and we'll do our best. But I'm hoping that we can really understand why justice-driven curriculum matters for white students. I
think that's the one I'm looking forward to the most. I really want to hear what makes white students specifically in need of this extra education.
And determine how you can implement changes to your teaching that are good for students and good for you. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And finally, gain some tools to face the challenges that arise in equity work.
I'm all for it. I want to learn as much as I can about how you implement this kind of thinking into education and want to spread it far and wide.
We know they exist on a personal level, on a community level, and on a national level with state and national policy that's going out right now. So we're going to talk about the why, the how, and the trials.
Good.
So I do want to make sure that we set the context for today
Mhm.
with an overview of disparities that exist in education and really an encouragement to you for being a justice-driven educator. This work matters. Lives are on the line. And I'm so, so thankful that you're here to learn, that we can learn together and grow together. I'm really hopeful and assuming that I'll learn from all of you guys as well.
I somehow doubt it, but lives are on the line. Wow. Okay. This must be very serious. So tell me the why.
Next, I really want to talk about the how.
No. Okay. All right. Well, let's get to the why as quickly as possible, please.
Some steps that you can take right now in your classroom
Okay.
to help you and your students cultivate a culture of equity and belonging.
And equity and belonging, but of course, portioning off the white students for special education. Oh,
That they can then take into the world.
yeah.
And finally, the trials. We'll just have some advice on navigating some personal and professional and community stress that will arise. I say may, but let's be honest, right? Will arise as you engage in this work.
Community stress community stress. Like, I don't know, parents going, why are you treating my child differently because of their skin color? That kind of stress.
So I want to talk about the segregation of our schools, and the segregation landscape of our schools really doesn't look a whole lot different than it did when Brown versus the Board of Ed.
The segregation in our schools doesn't look that much different than back when Brown versus Board of Education occurred. Well, you know what? You might be able to convince me of that, because given the fact that racial affinity groups are being practiced and pushed in many educational spheres lately, it might be the case that institutional segregation is as bad now as it was back then. But go on.
Was passed. So right now, greater than 50% of students in the United States attend a school in which 75% or more of the population is white or non-white. So
Wait, what? Greater than 50% of the students in the US attend a school in which 75% or more of the population is white or non-white. Well, you know what? I'd wager to guess that 100% of the population in any given school is either white or non-white, if those are the only two categories you're coming up with. So, wait, what? Am I, okay, at her very first statistic, am I completely misreading that? Because that sounds like absolute nonsense. Anyone, chat, tell me, am I off base here? Okay, explain.
we're talking segregated spaces, and I've taught in those spaces as well. Right now, I've been in a segregated white space, a very predominantly white space, but
A segregated white space. Okay. Well, okay, here's what I'd like to know then. In what school did you work in which the students were, as part of policy, segregated on the basis of race? I would really love to know what school that is, because as far as I can tell, they're breaking the law. I mean, I guess unless it's a weird, private school or something. Segregated white space, really? Okay.
I've been in spaces in other schools. This school I taught in Chicago was 100% racial demographic was 100% Black. So I've seen.
So you're saying that you were at a school where there was no racial diversity whatsoever. Is that less or more bad than what you're worried about? What?
Different ways in which our school districts are segregated.
Okay. Segregated by intent or segregated by circumstance? Which is it? And if it's segregated by circumstance, then it's not really segregated. It's just how things hashed out. So I'm sorry for keeping the pause, but I don't understand.
Right now, 80% of America's public school teaching staff identify as white. But if you break that down even further, you're going to see that number grow. So right now, only 7% of our teaching staff identify as Black, and only 2% of our teaching staff in the United States identify as Black men.
Well, what if that 80% decided to identify as not white? Would that make you feel better? And so what is the solution to that problem? As I ask in almost every one of these kinds of presentations, okay, you presented that as a problem. How would you solve for that problem?
And so while we have that 80% number, look at that difference in the student population number. 48% of students enrolled in public school identify as white. So we have a large gap there in representation.
So you want to reduce the staff at public schools who are white by half, or well, a little bit more than half, in order to what? Equalize representation? Okay, well, tell me how you're going to implement this racial filtration of hiring practice in schools. I would love to know this.
And finally, and I think we really do need to sit with this statistic, 40% of America's schools, 40%, nearly half of America's schools do not have a single teacher of color on staff.
Okay, again, you're going to solve for this how? And though I hesitate to ask the question, what does race have to do with teaching ability? I'll wait.
That was my experience at Mount Vernon until this year. They just hired their first educator of color.
And you were contributing to the problem by simply being there. You understand this, right? I mean, your skin color was incorrect if you wanted to help change that statistic. So why would you even bother working at a school if you're going to just be contributing to the problem?
So I actually want to just pause right here because those are some really big statistics. And have a chat in the chat box.
Okay.
What is the impact of this racial isolation?
Racial isolation. I don't know. What is the impact of this racial isolation that you're implying is systemic, but you're not actually saying it is?
What do you see being the impact of this racial isolation? And
are you actually having a conversation? Because that doesn't look like a chat box to me. It looks like you're asking yourself a question you'd like to answer. Okay.
We can actually, that can be in the chat, or if the raise hand feature is available and you want to share verbally, I am totally okay with that too.
Man, I wish I was live on this thing when it happened somehow. That would have been great.
Thank you, Rebecca. I see loneliness, anger, and despair. Absolutely.
Loneliness, anger, and despair. Okay. Does Rebecca know that for a fact?
I really want to pause and think about how this reality of the makeup of our schools is impacting our students.
I don't know.
Is impacting our educators.
Yeah.
So share your thoughts in the chat.
Okay.
Or feel free to raise your hand and share out loud.
I wish I could.
Children grow up to become the jobs they see themselves in. If they don't see themselves in education, they won't grow up to be educators. Yes, I am fortunate to be on the Build for Equity team, and that is a primary problem in the educator pipeline is lack of representation, not being able to see oneself as an educator.
That's right, everyone. Everyone lacks the imagination of ambition or interest in anything if they do not see someone who resembles them physically already doing it. That's how that works. That's why we've never had a female astronaut. That's why we've never had a female scientist. That's why we've never had a black professional baseball player. That's how that works, guys. Just so you know, that's how that works. There's so much evidence for this. Everyone is exactly in the same rut as everyone who has ever come before them who looks like them. As we know.
As an educator of color, I am tokenized. Thank you so much for sharing that in vulnerability. I really appreciate that. And it's absolutely something that we see in another major problem that's been coming up.
You are tokenizing them. Look at you. 40% of America's schools do not have a single teacher of color on staff. Oh, but my school just got one. Doesn't matter that they have a name or an education of their own. No, they just are a color, not white. Are you even listening to yourself? And, conversely, is your audience member even paying attention to what you're implying with your statistics and your complaints?
In the conversations about the pipeline, isolation, loss of sense of self-esteem. Yes, kids of color don't learn as well. Absolutely.
What? Kids of color don't learn as well because their teacher doesn't look like them? Okay, well then, won't the white students suffer if their teacher doesn't look like them? Heck, isn't the answer then that only like shall congregate with like for the most optimal educational experience? And you're arguing against segregation? What exactly is the solution to your problems here? I'm getting a lot of conflicting messages.
Research shows that even if students of color have even one teacher of color in elementary school, I believe it is, they are exponentially more likely to be successful in school, to graduate high school, to go on to post-secondary learning, to score better on tests.
Okay, well, if that is true, then obviously the most optimal educational situation is to match children with teachers who share their skin color from kindergarten through college in order to gain the maximum result of educational benefit. I mean, I can't come to any other logical conclusion based on what you just said. So if you actually believe that that is the case, then you must believe that segregation is the answer to the problem. Or am I missing something?
Lack of empathy. Yes, white students do experience a lack of empathy.
White students experience a lack of empathy just in general because they're white? They're less human than other people because of their skin color? What? Boy, this is just jam-packed with new revelations.
Absolutely. Voices of color are unheard or being called divisive or controversial. This is, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And we're here to have the conversation that because of this isolation, we as educators, because of this segregation, we as educators have a responsibility to desegregate the education experience.
Okay, well, just to set your fears at ease, your white voice is putting out some pretty divisive and controversial statements right now, just so you know. And secondly, you want to do what regarding segregation again? Educational segregation, when you just told us that matching people on the basis of their skin color is actually a benefit, a net positive? I didn't think I'd have my mind blown quite this much on a Sunday morning.
And so I don't want to just present this problem to you and say, wow, this is a terrible problem. What can you do? But I want to present this problem to you and say, there are things we can do.
I am dying to know what we can do. What can we do to solve this problem? Also, I just heard like a little moaning sound on the recording. I'm wondering if one of her audience members has tuned into the voice chat or something. We'll get to that momentarily. Thank you, Mr. Tickletrunk. I have to remind myself these people call themselves anti-racist while they push racism and different flavors of segregation. What a time to be alive. Yeah, it is really through the looking glass kind of thinking where someone says, I am X and that bad thing is Y. When if you actually look at they are the Y. Like, what? It's so... You want to talk about like cognitive dissonance in action. The last 7 minutes of this presentation has been just rife with it. Unless I am the one in the alternate dimension. I mean, it's possible that I have somehow misheard or misinterpreted what she's said this whole time. So let's go forward. Let's find out what the actual active solutions are to the problems as presented. If I don't lose my train of thought here.
We can desegregate the education experience,
Okay.
even beyond just desegregate or diversifying our curriculum. I think we need to think outside the box, really diversify.
diversify our curriculum. You haven't said anything about actual educational standards yet. You've just talked about the skin color of the participants in education. So don't tell me you're going to start retreating to actual academics and ignore everything you just said.
The experience.
Uh-huh.
Please do continue to share and talk.
Okay.
So here's my charge to you, especially when we consider white students.
Yes.
We are sending students out into the world to live and work within the systems that exist.
Uh-huh.
Therefore, we have a responsibility to steward their education in a way that allows them to build and be part of systems and communities that are centered on belonging.
Taken all by itself, that sounds either completely benign or mildly sinister. Not quite sure yet, although I can guess. Thank you again, Mr. Tickle Trunk. Spread by textbook cult behavior, by the way. Yeah. What was it, like a few streams back, there was that lady who was talking about how she based her entire curriculum around a single book that happened to be this thin, cheap self-help book that I looked up on Amazon and had like terrible ratings, and people were like, this is all nonsense and repetitive garbage. But somehow she based her entire school's educational curriculum around this one book. And it wasn't the Bible or something, you know, it was just this weird self-help book. And boy, oh boy. Remember, guys, this lady runs a consulting firm, so she's got more of an interest here than just the benevolence of education in mind.
If we do not address implicit bias, micro and macro aggression, right? If we do not address internalized racism in our white students, they will carry that into our communities.
Yes, because they're a disease, you see. If we don't address the inherent flaws in people who are white, they're just going to take those flaws and be alive in the community. You know, we have to address microaggressions, you know, like the implication that someone is inherently morally or intellectually defective because of their skin color. We have to address that. We can't have that happen. Now, let me tell you why white students need to be educated specially.
It will carry that into our workspaces, which is why I feel so strongly that this work is so critical. So that is my charge to you. Help them do this now in school so that they can be part of rebuilding systems to be more equitable.
Yes, get them while they're young so they can change the world to look the way we want it to. Yes, I understand the concept.
And I use that word belonging, and I really want to be clear about what I mean by this word belonging.
Do you mean participation by parents in a child's education? I'll be really curious to see how much, or if at all, our speaker talks about parental involvement in education in this particular scheme.
Hey, look up Dr. John Powell, a phenomenal educator and researcher who talks a lot about belonging and isolation. So belonging, he says, or being fully human. So when we talk about belonging, we really are talking about being fully human.
Belonging or being fully human. Okay, so anyone who has any doubts or questions about this theory is less than human? What? Okay, maybe I must be jumping the gun here.
It means more than just having access. It means more than just being allowed to walk into the school building. It means more than just being allowed to interview for the job, right? And we can talk about that word allowed too, and who holds the space to allow, right?
Well, you're setting up an allow system with your first statistics, saying that there are too many of one kind of person in a particular place, and that is a problem. I can't imagine how you're going to solve for that without going into allow territory.
But belonging really entails being respected at a basic level. That includes the right to both co-create and make demands on society.
I guess it depends on the reasonableness of those demands and what it is you're attempting to create. Because, you know, if you're attempting to create something that is effectively meant to destroy something else, somebody might have a problem with that. So does belonging allow for negotiation? Is there any room for compromise in there?
Right? Co-create and make demands on society. And
Like?
yes, Anne, I couldn't agree more. Belonging carries such dignity, and dignity
What?
different than respect. Dignity is not earned. Dignity is innate. We hold dignity.
Dignity is not earned, it is innate. I mean, there are some basic human dignity type things, sure, not treating people like an animal. That's why you have things like, cruel and unusual punishment laws and stuff like that. Sure. There are innate sort of moral imperatives human to human in a civilized society. That's true. But basic human dignity does not then mean I have to acquiesce to anything you say or want just because you're there. That's not, I don't, okay. Again, maybe I'm jumping the gun, but there's an implication here that I'm not quite sure I agree with.
Right? So are we uplifting the dignity of the students in our classroom, or are we denying their personal dignity? Are we actually harming them by not acknowledging their dignity?
Okay, well, what does it mean to acknowledge or conversely not acknowledge a student's dignity? What does that mean? Because you're throwing a lot of terms around, but you're not giving me any specifics or details.
So I love this definition of belonging. I think it's a great anchor.
That's not a definition. That's some kind of weird credo. No.
For our work today.
Yeah.
And I think looking up Dr. Powell's work is a great idea.
Why do I think that Dr. Powell is an ideologue? I could be mistaken. I don't know. I've never heard of the guy, but does he have a series of self-help books or things like that on Amazon?
And just one more point about belonging. So if we look at this is a great resource, and you'll see the book at the bottom. It's called Belonging Through a Culture of Dignity. I recommended this book on my resource document for you as well. But this is what Dr. Powell and Cobb call the belonging gap.
Okay.
So what they're saying is that in schools, we are asking students to move from safety needs to achievement, and we don't recognize belonging. Or worse yet, we ask them to achieve in order to belong.
What about Maslow's triangle? Because that already kind of includes all those steps to, from the basics up to self. Pardon me. Is Dr. Powell and Cobb just reinventing the wheel by any chance and doing a fairly bad job at it?
But that if we actually focused on what it means to belong to the school community in an authentic way, and the students had the opportunity to do that, then we would be much more successful at providing opportunities for achievement.
Okay. I will stipulate to the theory for the moment. Give me an active example of what it means to engender belonging in a student population.
So we talked a little bit about what isolation
Lord.
looks like. So I would love to chat for a moment. Type a word or phrase now that describes what it would look like if our schools were actually centered on belonging.
Oh, I don't know. Peace, harmony, happiness, advancement, brotherhood, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
Yes, loving, community, joy, connections, happy,
yes,
respect,
happy.
Peace.
Yes,
far less bullying.
Far less bullying.
Safety, inclusivity, actual safety, right?
Oh,
Love, happy, inclusive. Yes.
Intersectionality, authenticity, JEDI.
So we see the segregated space that we're in.
Yeah. Well, I'm seeing the one you want to create.
We see what we can achieve. I mean, who doesn't want to be in a space where these adjectives are actually true, right?
Actually true by whose perspective?
Students feeling accepted, unafraid, empowered. Yes.
Empowered unless they're white, and then they're flawed and they need to be given special education. When are you going to address that part of it?
Liberated is a word
Liberated.
that is often comes to mind when I think of a school like this.
Ah.
So let's work towards this belonging.
Okay, let's do so. What are the steps? Yes.
So how do we do this?
Yes.
So I would argue that we do this by
Yeah.
giving our students, and I really am talking about white students here, but there's some caveats, right? So we'll talk through that. But giving our students,
Yeah, I want to promote belonging, but just for the moment, I'm only talking about the white students. Yeah, because everybody else who isn't white, they don't need to hear this. They're perfect the way they are. It's the white kids that need this education. Not making any assumptions on people on the basis of their race at all. No. I'm against segregation. I want to desegregate the educational process. Now, let's talk to the white students first. Good God.
a fuller truth of a fuller humanity for a fuller joy.
What does any of that mean? Are you going to get into the mechanical specifics of what a teacher is supposed to do in a classroom to achieve any of this? Please.
And this is applied to all students. A fuller truth of a fuller humanity for a fuller joy.
Then what? Okay. If you were just putting this out there, whatever this is, as just, this is what students need to hear writ large, I mean, it'd still be kind of goofy, but it'd be a completely different conversation. But that's not what this is. This is all framed around students of a particular skin color need to hear this first and foremost. Why are you retreating to students? All students need to hear this. Then what's the point of segregating the education?
So let's talk through each of those briefly.
Yes.
I always find myself returning to this quote by Bryan Stevenson, who's the author of Just Mercy.
Real quick. Thank you, Non-Vitae Rex. We like fake safety where people are still allowed to fail or succeed on their own merits. Equity and inclusion now. Yeah. I can only imagine where this is going, and I can imagine quite a bit. But there was a friend of mine showed me a quote today or yesterday or whatever it was, and it was something to the effect of equality is now seen as divisive. Like equality is treating someone unfairly because people have been led to expect entitlements above and beyond other people. So saying that, I'm promoting actual equality would in fact be a downgrade from their expectations and what they think they deserve. It's a very weird sort of backwards psychological perspective on things. But that's what that reminds me of. So anyway, Bryan Stevenson. He's the leader of the Equal Justice Project, I think, or something like that. Yeah, no, I have a picture of him in my mind. Yeah, something like that.
Because I think sometimes we want to tell ourselves the unfortunate lie, and I really do feel it's unfortunate, that we are all just good, right?
I don't know of anyone who has lived any amount of time in real life who thinks that, quote, we are all just good. There are many shades of gray in every person. And my shade of gray might be someone else's ray of light. It all depends on perspective. But I think in general terms, most civilized people ultimately don't want to harm others or harm themselves. And that's about as universally good as you're probably going to find most of the time, depending. And now the lights are flickering again. Gosh, dang it. If I disappear, guys, I apologize ahead of time.
And when that desire to be good becomes an identity, then it prevents us from ever acknowledging the spaces in which we are weak.
What?
So a fuller truth for ourselves includes acknowledgement and vulnerability of the spaces in which we are weak. And I will always be the first in my classroom to acknowledge my weaknesses, to acknowledge the way that I'm working on my biases, to acknowledge the way in which I have harmed students because of unmitigated bias.
So you're confessing to the sin of being what you are. Then might I ask, why are you the one to deliver this message? Isn't everything you're telling us suspect? simply on the basis that you're white, that you've just confessed that you've done harm to people and so on and so forth, unknowingly? How do I know you're not doing it right now? I mean, you've set the table. You've put out the rules of how I'm supposed to assess you or anyone else. Why do these rules not apply to you in this very moment?
Stevenson says, and here's the power. There is no power in being good. There is no power in that.
There's no power in being good. Okay.
But there is a power, a strength, a power even in understanding brokenness, because embracing our brokenness creates a need and a desire for mercy.
Our brokenness. So projection or assumption that someone or something is flawed, or as flawed as I am, therefore I'm not the only one. The problem isn't with me. It is a universal problem. That's what it sounds like you're saying.
And perhaps a corresponding need to show mercy. When you experience mercy, you learn things that are hard to learn otherwise. You see things you can't otherwise hear. You hear things you can't otherwise hear. And you begin to recognize the humanity that resides in each of us.
Yeah, I love it when someone comes along who sees my brokenness without ever actually, talking to me or knows anything about me, and extends mercy onto me despite my inherent flaws. I love it when people do that. Don't you? Isn't it great to have mercy be bestowed upon you by someone who just knows how flawed you are? Yeah, it's great. Real great.
If we do not feel that we need, and if we do not see how we have received grace and mercy, then it is very difficult to have empathy. It is very difficult to show grace and mercy to others because we feel superior.
Sorry, who's feeling superior to what now? You're categorizing people on the basis of race. You're saying that certain people need to have special education based on their race. You're saying that certain kids will only learn correctly if they are taught by people of a particular race. Who's superior to what again? Grace and mercy. These are really big terms. You're going to do this in an elementary school classroom? Is that the role of the teacher in an elementary school classroom, to project grace and mercy onto children? I mean, beyond just the basics of being a rational, reasonable human being to children. Where are you going with this? What does this mean on the ground to the teacher in the classroom? Are we going to get to that point, please?
And that's not true.
Oh.
So let's cut out the idea of being good and let's embrace our brokenness.
What? Good Lord, you want to wallow in your deficiencies? Okay.
I think that's step one of truth, and helping students do that.
Helping students wallow in their deficiencies? Oh boy, this will produce a whole generation of positive individuals in our society. What?
Helping students do that safely is so important.
Okay, well tell me, how do you safely guide children into embracing their brokenness? What does that look like in the classroom? How does that curriculum break down? Are you going to get to specifics?
So that's part one of a fuller truth.
Okay.
And then I would say one of the most empowering things that I've experienced is learning a fuller truth about our history, about our history of systemic racism in the United States.
Yes. The most empowering thing was for you to learn that by the mystic chords of melanin, you are guilty of crimes committed by people who just happen to share a similar skin tone to you. Is that where we're going here? And thus you're going to embrace your brokenness as the recipient of benefits of systemic racism? Is that it?
And in my African-American lit class, we study that. We start with Stevenson's book, Just Mercy, and look at mass incarceration. And
mass incarceration. Yeah, that's when all the police trucks go around and just arrest people willy-nilly and put them in prison for no reason, en masse. That's how that works. Yeah, the entire system is geared to just putting people in prison with no due process whatsoever. Just get them in the cages. That's how that works.
And then we say, how did we get here? And we start with the rich history of people from the continent of Africa and move through the evolution of slavery to mass incarceration.
Uh-huh.
And that has been eye-opening.
Mm-hmm.
What you'll see here are images from a civil rights tour that my students took.
Okay.
And we met with civil rights veterans
Yeah.
here. Charles McLaurin, who worked with Amzie Moore and SNCC as we were visiting the Fannie Lou Hamer Memorial. So Charles McLaurin's in blue, and the man in the tan jacket next to him came over to us. He's in the neighborhood and said, this man took my mother to try to register to vote 25 times.
Wow.
And if you know anything about working with SNCC and trying to get people registered to vote in Mississippi during the civil rights movement, you know that that was a life-threatening job.
Speaking of the civil rights movement, do you know anything about not treating students differently in public schools on the basis of their skin color? Do you acknowledge anything that they were actually fighting for at that time, the universal equality that they were striving for? And do you see how just a little bit what you're suggesting be done with students goes entirely against those ideals? Does it at all register?
This is Catherine Brooks. She was a freedom rider and was arrested at this time.
Mm-hmm.
And this is Joanne Bland. She crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge on Bloody Sunday
Mm-hmm.
and turned around Tuesday as a 9-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
And she's here with our students asking us to pick up a piece of crumbled gravel from the space where the march started. And she said, think about the life you want for the people you love when you cross that bridge.
Mm-hmm.
We took you this far. Take us all the way this time.
Yeah, except you know how many steps backwards across the Edmund Pettus Bridge you are actually moving people with what you're promoting? Why are you unable to see the inevitable outcome of what you are suggesting have happened? Why? It's quite extraordinary. It's not unique, but unto you as an individual, it is extraordinary.
And so when we teach a fuller truth
Yes.
in our schools,
Uh-huh.
then our students have a better understanding
Mm-hmm.
of the makeup of our nation.
Sure.
And that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
I remember there was a foreign exchange student in one of my classes in Mount Vernon, Iowa from Germany.
From Germany, you say? Okay. So someone from a completely different culture and country. All right. Well, obviously that's irrelevant. What was this student's skin color?
We started talking a little bit about World War II because of a reading that we were doing.
Uh-huh.
And I remember he said, oh, I hate talking about this. And I can see all of my students kind of clench, thinking that somehow they've offended him by talking about something terrible that the nation of Germany participated in. But I knew that that wasn't what was going on, because I knew that was a very American perspective. And I said, Finn, why? Why do you hate talking about this? And he said, because I love my country so much, and I am so angry to know that we caused this harm. And I want so much to do better.
Well, you see, I guess you said his name was Finn. Yeah, the history of his country in relatively recent times, not all that bright and shiny. But here's the thing. It's not Finn's fault, and he shouldn't be made to feel guilty for the sins of his forebears. All right? I mean, certainly using the bad acts of the past as a lesson of what not to do in the future is hopefully kind of how we're supposed to move through the world, learn from our mistakes and so on. Right? Okay. So is that what you're talking about? You are promoting that kid to continue feeling that way, to live and embrace his brokenness because of where he comes from and where he was born, even though he had nothing to do with those events? That sounds like what you're aiming at, given what you said previously.
It is possible for both of those things to exist in the same places. And here's what happens when it doesn't. And I've said this before, so if you've heard me say it, I'm sorry, I'm saying it again.
Uh-huh.
But let me tell you a little bit about my education experience and
Oh, I can't wait to hear about your education experience.
how that hurts students.
Okay.
So I grew up, and in my classes, I learned about slavery,
Uh-huh.
but I didn't learn about the history of the people on the continent of Africa. I learned about the Civil War, but I didn't learn about the triumph and tragedy of Reconstruction. I learned about Jim Crow, but I didn't learn about the horrors of lynching. I learned about the Civil Rights Movement, but basically that it was MLK and the March on Washington. I didn't learn about Amzie Moore and Fannie Lou Hamer and Reverend Shuttlesworth. I learned about the war on drugs, but I didn't learn about mass incarceration. And when I've been given this incomplete history, I ultimately think that as a nation, we're good because I'm not experiencing racism daily.
Oh, right. You just want to impose it upon other white people and kids. That's all. Well, here's the thing. There is never going to be an educational experience where any student learns all of history, because there are other subjects to learn and only so many hours in the day and weeks in the year. So, yeah, none of us have been taught everything about everything. Of course, the implication here is that, oh, the school's giving you a sanitized version of history. And you know what? Depending on the textbook, depending on the teacher, that may be true. And getting a fuller understanding of history is not a bad thing, right? But I have to wonder then, what history are you focusing on and holding against people in modern times? Because that seems to be the pattern of behavior lately. But maybe I'm just jumping ahead. Lights flickered again. Boy, I hate this. I'm like I'm sitting on like pins and needles here, waiting for everything to just shut down. And if it does, the stream will just keep going because I haven't pushed the button to end it. I really hope that doesn't end up being like some long, drawn out blank screen anyway.
So I think we're good. We're good, right? The problems in our past are dealt with and they weren't really that bad anyway. And so I carry that mindset into my classrooms in Chicago. And suddenly when I'm teaching about the civil rights movement, I don't understand why my classroom full of students of color are getting so angry.
Wait, you got all the way from your regular education to teaching in a classroom without learning anything on the periphery of your initial history education? Really? Is that what she's saying?
Because I don't understand their lived experience, because I don't understand the history of our nation.
How is their lived experience have anything to do with the history of our nation when they were not alive in the time periods that you've been going over? So you, I can't believe I'm actually asking this, all things considered. Also, is it just me or is this guy like Aquaman in the background here? Did he? I wonder if he dressed like to have the Aquaman color scheme that particular day. So you go into a classroom full of kids that look a particular way, and simply by looking at them, you know what their lived experience is or should be or what you can expect it to be based on history. Okay, well, what should my lived experience be? You tell me, since you seem to know, you know history, what is my lived experience? And the only thing I'll tell you about me is that I'm white. Okay, so you tell me. I would love to know.
And learning that history absolutely changed my life and will absolutely change your life. And whether you're in an English classroom, an elementary school classroom, a math classroom, you can do this.
Do
right?
what? Do what?
You can do this. It's the story problems you tell. It's the scientists you lift up. It's the books you read. It's the places you travel.
And what filter am I supposed to put over those decisions, might I ask? I can guess, but you're not saying. Will you get to some specifics, please?
You can do this.
Do what?
Wherever you are at. And it is critical and it's empowering, because when students learn this history, they are empowered to make change. When students see how systems were built, they are empowered to change them. Because suddenly we don't exist in a society where things just are the way they are, because we teach them how they became the way that they are.
Yes, you're training activists. You're not teaching students, you are training activists. You're creating change makers. Right? You're creating activists in your own mold. Again, okay, a couple of questions. First and foremost, what are you talking about? And two, where are the parents? What role do the parents play in this grand plan of yours? They're not your children, and they're not your disciples either. Or don't you see that?
And that is empowering. My students, after this tour, came home, developed K through 12 curriculum that they argued should be implemented mandatorily, took it before the superintendent, and I was blessed to be able to teach one of the classes that they created.
Wow, you took a bunch of students, isolated off into a place, you conditioned them to think a certain way, they came back and demanded something that you agreed with, and oh, I was so proud to do it. Golly, it's a mystery how that happened.
This empowers them. Teach a fuller truth.
This indoctrinates them. This conforms them to my way of thinking.
Whew. All right.
Yeah, do you feel empowered now? Since you testified?
Next,
yes.
Teach a fuller truth of a fuller humanity.
What does that mean?
We have an absolutely problem with segregation in our schools.
Yeah, and you are promoting it if you hadn't heard your own voice these last several minutes.
We have a huge problem with underrepresentation.
We also have a huge problem with racial affinity groups or things with different names but the same function. Are you going to address those?
So you need to diversify the education experience.
How?
You need it. We have a privilege as educators, right? We have a podium. We have a space. Let's give that space up.
What do you mean? What are you talking about?
This is an example of that. I wanted to address this problem by making sure that every student of Mount Vernon had the opportunity to sit down and be taught by a person of color.
Pardon me a moment while I get up from my desk. Okay. We want to decrease racism. We want to decrease racial segregation. But I'm going to make sure that every student, one-on-one, is taught by someone based on their skin color. Man.
Who was an expertise in his or her field.
Oh, but what does that matter? What does that matter? What matters it? Their merits. The first and only consideration for their participation is their skin color. What matters it? What they can do or what they do know, when all that matters is what they look like. Come on, lady.
And so we started something called the CARE conference, which stands for Connect, Absorb, Respond, and Empower. And what we did as students, we don't have school off on MLK Day, and that's a whole other story that we can get into. But what we did is on MLK Day, we had this conference where students were able to attend a variety of sessions. We had about 30 different people of color who were experts in various areas of.
Yeah, again, no. What's the first thing you mentioned? What's the first thing? What is the first check mark on your list? An element of irrelevancy to character and ability. Everything that comes after that is itself irrelevant to your decision-making process. Stop mentioning their merit unless it's the first thing you're talking about. And it's not. So it doesn't matter to you.
Expertise from science and business and engineering to the arts. And students just went and followed their interests and were taught about that area of expertise by a person of color.
What is the difference between an engineering expert that is white and an engineering expert that is black? What is the net worth of educational value between those two people if they are both experts in their fields? Is she even listening to herself right now? Good Lord, this woman is allowed to teach children? Oh, man.
And the idea is we want to help to destroy the monolith that we have created about people of color. And that monolith becomes even more intensified when you are in a school that is highly segregated, that is highly isolated, when you aren't building authentic relationships.
You know, I could be mistaken, and I don't think I am. When she says segregated, I think she's talking about demographic proportionality. She's talking about there are more of one kind of person in this place than there are of another kind of person, specifically based on race. I don't think she's talking about actual policy or actual structural segregation. I think she's just talking about population variances. I mean, unless every school she goes to just happens to be one that implements regimented racial segregation. All that my imagination allows me to think here is that when she says segregation, she's talking about there are too many white people in this space. That's all I can draw from what she's said so far. And I don't think I'm too far off the mark.
And we do this for a fuller joy. So when I talk about authentic relationships, I really talk about authentic partnerships. We have an amazing partnership with the school that I taught at in Chicago called Collins Academy. It's really an amazing redemption story, I would say, in my own life.
Collins Academy. I wonder if that's a private school. Private schools can get away with a lot more stuff if they don't take federal funding. They don't fall under necessarily the same strictures and laws as if they're accepting any federal funding. So I'm curious.
And so we visit students and students visit us, and we're not going to help or serve or volunteer. Let's not take our white students out into the community to help. That just continues to add to that narrative of disparity, right?
Don't take the white kids out to help. That adds to the narrative of disparity. So what, if you took the not white kids out to help, then that wouldn't add to the narrative of disparity, because if they're not white, then everyone assumes that they're what? Not possessing of things? Good gravy, lady. I've asked it too many times. I'm not going to say it again. Man.
But instead, we just spend time together. We would go to Chicago and go out to lunch and go to a museum and do a scavenger hunt and just spend time building relationships. Last year, in 2019, students from Collins Academy came to Iowa. We went on college tours. We went sledding. They presented. They taught us. They presented at the CARE conference.
What does any of that have to do with building? What, just making friends in different places? Okay, I mean, sounds benign, but I'm sure there's going to be something creepy in a second. Thank you, Mike R. How many bingos do you think we'd have by now? Oh, jeez. Yeah, if we were using the TEDx card right now, man. Well, you know, truth be told, there probably wouldn't be. She has such a centralized theme here that we'd have multiple instances that would justify circling the same squares. But it would depend on the card, obviously, and the arrangement of the squares. I don't know that we'd have all that many squares circled. Like I say, we'd probably double and triple circled several squares at this point. But yeah, we might have a bingo or two. I don't know if it actually run the decks on that one.
And some of these relationships that have been built are incredibly profound.
Based on what factors, might I ask?
The first time that I ever took students to Chicago, I had a girl who stayed for a volleyball tournament that weekend, and she came back to me on Monday and she said, "You know what, Mrs. Erickson? I'm not afraid of Black people anymore.
Well, then, I obviously don't need to ask what the race of that little girl was. Who made her afraid of Black people? Right? Or who told her that she should be afraid, or that her very nature makes her afraid, and now she's not? Okay, I mean, for all I know, this little girl's parents are just virulent racists. Okay, maybe that's the case. I don't know. Is she going to tell us that? Probably not.
Once she recognized that fear-based bias that we have, that isolation breeds, right?
Isolation. Again, I keep thinking when she says segregation, she's talking about too many white people in a space. And when she says isolation, she's talking about too many white people in a space. Right? Because if you're segregated by being one of the larger demographic in a particular area, therefore you are also isolated from anything and everyone else, and everything and anyone else seems alien and scary automatically. Right?
And through relationships, and she's not finished in her journey, certainly, but through relationships, she was able to eradicate some fear that she held. And that's powerful.
Okay, you know what? If this little girl, for whatever reason, and I can only imagine, did have some discomfort around people who did not look like her prior to making friends with people who didn't look like her, and now she's more accepting and so on. Okay, I'm not going to begrudge that all on its own. That kid, whoever she is, outside of all the politics and the ulterior motives and everything else, if that is what she took away from that, ultimately, that skin color is irrelevant to the quality of a person, I'm not going to argue with that. I'm not going to lambast it. That's fine. I'm just very, very cautious about what this particular teacher here is taking from that and how she's going to use it to bend her agenda into something that sounds very benevolent, but is actually taking us ridiculously large steps backwards in society.
Desegregate your school with authentic relationship building experiences.
What is that? Okay, so if you have a whole bunch of white kids in your school, take them to Chicago. Is that it? Or Iowa? Desegregate your with relation. What? Okay, consistency of terminology, please. I mean,
if you're a K through 12 educator, that might be .org actually. Empatico has an amazing program where you can partner up with a school somewhere else in the nation, sometimes somewhere else in the world, and just partner with that school and learn alongside together.
That is not a new concept at all, but okay. I mean, the internet's been around a while now.
That is an incredibly powerful way to create those authentic relationships. So we're teaching a fuller truth of a fuller humanity for a fuller joy.
Boy, you know, that mantra, really catchy. Thank you, Keeverdam. I think your brain will lose power before your building does, LOL. Possibly so, but I don't know. We'll see. If I can make it another 20 minutes, we'll be all right.
And I want to show you a little bit of, I think I missed something.
No, you know what you missed so far? Details, specifics, actual active examples of what you're talking about. Going on glorified field trips says nothing about anything that you've been talking about previously. What goes on in the classroom? What actual steps are taken? How do you solve for the problems that you have highlighted? You haven't gotten us there yet. And what little you have given us is really messed up.
Maybe not. Okay, never mind. Well, we're going to get some student testimonies later.
Brian Stevenson's 4 keys to social justice work. You know, you're leaning awfully heavily on a very few number of people for your perspective on things. You don't think you might have a bit of a, I don't know, echo chamber going on?
Okay, So there's the why. Let's talk a little bit about the how. So
We were supposed to get to the how when you said we're going to get to the how is this done, and then you listed off your whole Fuller thing. Are we at the how now? White. I'm not going to complete it.
So Brian Stevenson says there's 4 keys to social justice work. Actually, let me stop.
What?
Sorry, I'm getting too ahead of myself. Anyone have questions right now?
I have several, but I'm pretty sure they're not going to be answered.
That they want to ask or statements they want to make. I've got my chat pulled up, so I'm trying to kind of peek back and forth.
Man, I wish I'd been on this thing live.
And I'll talk a little bit about some of those programs in more detail.
Oh man, that would have been great.
Yes, this work starting pre-K. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, start this work in pre-K. Yeah, teach small children how to assess themselves and others on the basis of race. Yeah, boy, you sure nailed it there.
Absolutely. All right, so we'll get into the how, and then we'll have questions later. So Brian Stevenson's 4 keys to social justice work: get close, change the narrative, be willing to be uncomfortable, and give and receive hope.
Okay.
And all of my lesson planning, all of the work that I do really hinges on these 4 elements.
Where are the parents? Where is the academic quality? You're discussing this with teachers. You're not pushing education. You're pushing ideology. Where are the parents? What actually goes into the academics?
So I'll give you a little bit of an idea for what you can do for each one. So when we talk about getting close, this really does mean building authentic relationships with community partners in schools with varying racial demographics.
So approach people based on their race, first and foremost. You know, that kind of rings a little hollow when you give away the secret like that, because then aren't you just encouraging people to tokenize others?
And if you're looking at other issues of social justice, or social injustice, I should say, you want to make sure that you are not just dealing with those issues from afar, that you are pressing into those communities, that you are learning from folks who are experiencing those injustices. And so getting close is key.
But I mean, if I go out and try to help, I'm just underlining the disparity, aren't I? Which is it?
Changing the narrative. Ensure that you're really analyzing how you're talking about the justice issue, and brainstorm ways to change any deficit language you use.
Deficit language. Yeah. You know, like, here, kids, today you're going to learn from this teacher because of the way they look. Yeah, I guess it's not very explicit, but oh, good Lord.
Think about the way we talk about things.
Yeah.
Because the way we talk about things drives the way that we feel about things.
Yeah. Listen to the way people talk about things. Listen to what they're actually saying. Listen to the implications of what it is they're proposing, even if they say it's something else. Because as we know, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea is those words, because those words are what were used to describe it. Yes. Pay no attention to the actual details or mechanisms therein. This is what we say it is, and thus it is. Never mind what goes on behind the curtain. Yeah.
So I think this is a really important conversation to use when you talk to students. Here's this area of injustice. What words do we use?
Here's this area of injustice. It's injustice because I tell you it is. So with that premise being fact without any exploration, let's move on from that. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Tickle Trunk. Children don't see race in others until you teach it to them. The Klan of 60 years ago would be very proud of this woman and her approach. Yeah, and I mentioned this before, and I think it came up last week as well. You'll often hear the tired phrase, you know, children start noticing difference at 3 and 4. And so in order to avoid any racist conclusions, we have to teach them early about race. And here's the thing. Noticing difference is not the same as evaluating quality or worth in someone. You know, noticing that a square is not a circle doesn't mean that someone then goes, oh, squares are better than circles inherently. You know, people will search for all of these little benchmarks, all of these little flags they can use to insert a completely irrelevant meaning to something and call it a decision point, where we have to inject our ideology, or else the worst is going to happen. If we don't get to boys when they're young, they're just going to end up to be misogynist rapists. So we have to tell them from the beginning to avoid and discourage the masculinity within them because it's inherently toxic, etc., etc.
To describe people who experience this injustice, for example. Next, be willing to be uncomfortable.
Oh, yeah.
So prepare your students for discomfort and tension.
Especially when you start accusing them sidewise of being guilty and holding the burden of crimes committed in the past by people that just happen to have their same skin color. Yeah, get ready for discomfort in telling kids that they're inherently flawed, and, you know, teach them to embrace their brokenness.
And be open about these feelings and talk about them and address them.
Yeah, don't tell them that they're wrong to feel bad for things they had nothing to do with. Just get ready to talk about them and address them. Not discourage them, but address it. Hi, thank you again, Mr. Tickle Trunk. May I suggest once again to make new Twitter accounts, icons of people wearing white hoods, congratulating CRT pushers everywhere. Yeah. What it's, oh, I forget that guy's name all of a sudden. Ryan, he's got a YouTube channel and does a series where it's like two guys wearing two different t-shirts, like racist and social justice activist. And one says something and the other one's like, yeah, I agree with that, because the notions are inherently the same. Yeah. Yeah. Things like that.
You want to take them into unfamiliar territory, prepared for that territory. I talk about my...
Yeah, Ryan Long. That's what I was about to say, Ryan Long, but I wanted to make sure I wasn't like mixing names up. But yeah, Ryan Long. Yeah. If you guys don't know about Ryan Long, look up his comedy and his YouTube channel and everything. It's very simple, but very eye-opening.
African-American lit class, and how students so often go through this period of grief, right? It's almost like white students go through the stages of grief. They're shocked, they're angry, they feel hopeless. And
really? What has engendered those feelings in them? Could it be any kind of, I don't know, accusatory language towards them as to what burdens they must bear on the basis of crimes committed by others? That their skin color makes them inherently flawed and tied to the worst possible behaviors of humankind? That kind of thinking? Is that what does that by any chance?
And walking them through those feelings is a really important piece of their change.
No, not walking them through their feelings. Telling them that they are not guilty of other people's crimes. How about that? No, but you want them to embrace their brokenness. You want them to marinate in guilt. That's what this is. And don't tell me otherwise. And also, is it really a school teacher's place to walk children through emotional and psychological trauma, whatever it is? Where are the parents? Why are you talking about this like a preacher and not a teacher?
Now, a quick caveat. When we talk about segregated schools and school populations, we have to remember that when schools are racially predominantly white, that there are still students of color in that space.
If you say predominantly white, I think the fact that others are not is inherently implied.
And we need to make sure we take extra care to ensure that those students of color are not being tokenized.
Everything you are doing here and promoting is tokenizing people. Are you nuts? You're marginalizing some, tokenizing others, and saying that it's all for the fuller experience. Are you listening to yourself? Kids, you're going to learn from this teacher today because they're not white. You want to tell me about tokenism again in the very program that you put together? Good gravy.
Are not looked to speak on behalf of all people of color.
No. You know, they don't have to, because you can stand up in front of the classroom and look out at the sea of faces in front of you and know exactly how to assess each one based on their tone.
So in my African American lit class, if there was a student of color in there, I made sure to have private conversations about that student, or I'm sorry, not about, with that student, to ensure
Was that a Freudian slip? Anybody else think that she was telling a little bit of a truth there?
constant check-ins, right?
Constant check-ins because they need special help because of their skin color? What did you assume about this student? I wondered that you thought they needed special one-on-one consultation.
Opening the door to ensuring that if something happened in the class, he or she had an open access to me so that I could address that if I didn't address that in the classroom, so that I could apologize. So you do need to make sure that you're meeting the needs of the students of color who are existing in predominantly white spaces.
So you're vilifying some of your students and yourself effectively on the basis of your skin color, right? And you're infantilizing other students on the basis of their skin color and giving them special access to you in case they feel bad without them actually telling you that they feel bad, because you assume that at some point they're going to feel bad and you're trying to preemptively strike at any discomfort you might cause that they might claim. Okay, sounds perfectly healthy.
And this work will help them, empower them to fight for change as well. I remember this.
That'll empower them by treating them like delicate china. That will empower them to have to go running to you every time they feel bad about something. That's going to empower them. Okay, yeah. Don't bother speaking up for yourself, standing up for yourself. If you feel bad, you come to me and I'll solve the problem, especially if the problem happens to be one of your white students or classmates. It's just
amazing moment. We went into Collins Academy and one of my white students came out. We were sitting at lunch later.
And their skin color is really important here.
On our way home. And she said, excuse me, I ran back in to go to the restroom. And I realized I was the only white person in the space.
Wow, gosh, who could have possibly made them so aware of skin color around them, I wonder? Who could have possibly made them value skin color as something to assess around their environment on site? I can't imagine.
And that's never happened to me before.
That's never happened to them before, or they just didn't value skin color until you told them to.
And I felt really uncomfortable suddenly.
Could it be because of any imparted guilt you might have placed upon this student based on their skin color and what you told them that they were effectively responsible for or guilty of by any chance?
And another student of color who was sitting next to her said, "That's my experience every day. And let me tell you about code switching." Yeah. Great. You got one person who's been turned into a perpetual apology machine, and another person who's been turned into a grievance dictator. It's great. It's great. And they had this amazing breakthrough conversation.
Oh, I'm sure.
Where true empathy was shown from that white student.
Yeah, because prior to that, that student couldn't possibly possess true empathy. There's no true empathy until it's my kind of empathy.
And they became really good friends. It was a beautiful thing.
Is it really good friends? Or was it a relationship built on guilt? Self-hatred by any chance? Anything like that? You want to address those feelings? You got to walk your students through those feelings? If your relationship is based on an irrelevancy like race, first and foremost, is it actually an authentic relationship? If that is what drove you to make a connection with another person? Maybe I'm just asking philosophical questions. I don't know.
And finally, give and receive hope.
Hope, yeah.
Remember that justice work is everyone's work for everyone's good.
Yeah, the greater good.
And that hope will ultimately come from relationship building.
So long as you're having relationships with the appropriate skin colors.
White students sometimes carry a narrative or carry an identity.
White students carry or are handed?
Of saviorhood, right? I must save. No, that is a burden we do not need to carry, right? That is a superiority complex that we do not need to bear.
That's right. Remember, white people, don't try to help. Your trying to help anyone is just an expression of your superiority and privilege. You need to grovel. You need to stay back. You need to not participate unless someone who doesn't look like you gives you permission. Remember that. Do not try to help anyone. That's a savior complex.
There's so much that we are missing out on when we hold that kind of burden. So justice work is everyone's work for everyone's good. It won't look the same for everybody. It won't look the same for your white students, but they have a specific role to play in this work. I have a tool for you. So this is the Social Justice Curriculum Planning Guide. And
the Social Justice Curriculum Planning Guide. Okay, I'm coming up on the bottom of the hour. Does she actually give any Zoom close-ups of what this thing actually possesses? So I don't have to listen to her anymore. Okay, I'll close out my viewing of this with this card she has up. It is a student testimony from Blake in the 12th grade. Okay, so at the tail end of high school. Quote, the structures of my comfort zone began to crumble and eventually blow away like fine dust. But the amazing thing was that construction began immediately. Walls of compassion were built on foundations of newfound awareness and knowledge. Experiences and emotions became the cement filling this new mold. As time went on, and continues to do so, more area becomes engulfed by this new complex arrangement of my ideals. It leads me to yearn to understand people different than me, to see individuals for who they really are and not for who society conditions me to believe. African American lit was bigger than I once believed. Looking back, it was never about just black and white. It was about taking off the tinted glasses placed so innocently on our eyes at a young age and being able to see each other for how we were made to be seen, as a human being, unquote. Well, Blake, as a practiced English major, I want to congratulate you on a giant block of pleasing bull. And that's not an insult. That is not an insult. Writing for your audience, especially in a situation like this, will get you so far ahead so quickly. You tell them what they want to hear, they will give you an A+ lickety split. Blake knows how to game the system. He knows the score, and he's playing it well right there. Because the first 4 or 5 sentences of that statement are absolute, utter, ideological buzzword nonsense. And he knows it. Blake is going to make it far in the world. I tell you what, Blake really will. Okay, I'm going to stop there because I don't think I can handle anymore. And I also think I've been very lucky, given the flickering of the lights, that I've lasted this long electricity-wise. So, everyone, if you have any questions, comments, or otherwise, please get them in now. I'm not going to wait too long, so hopefully I can shut everything down in time. Let's see. What do we have from people? The Asia Research Director at Walls of Compassion. Yeah, Walls of Compassion. Yeah, Mr. Tickle Trunk. Walls of Compassion is such an oxymoron. Yeah. See, like I say, but that I bet you if I listened to her reaction to this statement, it would be as glowing as Chernobyl, because she would be so happy to see those words and those combinations of just contradictions that sound so ideologically pleasing. She would be just, she'd be so happy. So happy. Like I say, Blake is going to go far, at least academically speaking. He's analyzed what the teacher is, what they want to hear, and he's giving it to them in whole, and he's going to go very far. Jaeger Pony, this is one of the presentations where the award you know point speech from Billy Madison would fit perfectly at the end. Yeah. Green Death. I was thinking the same thing, Scribe. He just BS this paper and doesn't even think this. I mean, now, there might be some elements there that he actually believes in, but he was padding this with so much gold that she was willing to receive. Mike Savage, Scribe, like that was worth putting into a dissertation for a master's in education. Yeah. If you find the right audience, that could be your golden ticket. Seriously. He said almost nothing in that entire statement, but gave that lady everything she could possibly want. It's impressive. Blake has got some skills. Hell Triangle, going to go back to the top and watch from the top. Well, best of luck, Hell Triangle. It has been quite a slog. And lastly, Arc210, it's going to be interesting to see what happens when this poison tree bears its fruit in 5 to 10 years. Yeah, well, we're already seeing the results of it in the conversation we're having now. In the examples we're seeing being played out in schools right now. Racial affinity groups, critical race theory. Oh, but it's not really critical race theory, just so you know. I mean, hell, look at my playlist. Look at any kind of series of TEDx talks. The more things that were on Tumblr 5 or 6 years ago that are in mainstream news outlets now, it's not going to stop. It's going to keep going until we reach some kind of breaking point where somebody says, oh, wait a second. Wait a second. Somebody in charge, someone with some authority, someone who can't be denied entirely is going to go, wait a second. But we're not there yet, apparently, because this lady teaches children. This lady educates educators. This lady, yeah. Anyway, I could say more, but I think I've said enough. Everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate your turning out to watch along with me. I hope your brains are not as melted as mine is right now. If you'd like to hear more from me, you can find me scheduled next Thursday night at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern for the next episode of TED Excellence, where I will look again at another off-brand TED Talk. Also, I have just posted my second true crime video. I'm curious to see how it turns out as far as response compared to the first true crime video, because the response to the first true crime video has blown my mind. And so I'm both excited and nervous to see what people think of my latest attempt. But do let me know in the comments. And yeah. And and as I should mention, and I meant to mention last time, if you happen to share my stuff, specifically on Twitter, please be sure to tag me in your tweet so that I know that you've done so I can thank you personally, because I really do appreciate it. And the same I would advise go for any other content creator that you happen to like and you happen to want to let people know about, because they will appreciate it too. All right, then. Everyone, again, thank you for joining me. I hope you all have a good rest of your Sunday. Thank you so much for your attendance, your participation, your generosity. Moderators, thank you for keeping an eye on things. Even though everyone here is so well behaved, you don't have very much to do at all. And everyone, I hope you're all safe and well. If you're not well, please get well soon, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.